Hello, my name is Jose Figueroa with an approved workman, where we are rightly dividing the word of truth. Welcome to another week of Bible study. I am glad that you're here as we open up God's Word one more time. Our current series is Preserving the Covenant Community, a study of the book of Esther. If you're new to this Bible teaching ministry, here is how you can learn more about our work. First, visit our website, www.anapprovedworkman.org. That's anapprovedworkman.org. On the website, you can learn more about the mission and vision for this ministry, our approach to Bible study, and also review our statement of faith. On the website, you can also listen directly to any episodes from our current series or any episodes from previous series we have done on the podcast. You can subscribe directly to the podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Amazon Music, as well as other podcast directories. If you want to connect with us on social media, my Instagram channel is @anapprovedworkman. We also have a page on Pinterest, a Pinterest profile @anapprovedworkman, and our Facebook page is an approved workman 215. Finally, you can also subscribe to our video channels on either YouTube or Rumble, and you can catch the video version of each episode of the podcast. In today's episode, we're continuing our series After the Exile, which is a study of the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Have you ever had to start over? Maybe your career took a downturn and you found yourself looking for a new position after many years of good and loyal service to your employer. Perhaps you lost your lifetime partner due to death or divorce. Now you're single again and trying to figure out how life goes on without that special person. Maybe you were hit with a major financial or health crisis. You thought things were under control. But now you're trying just to put the pieces together to move forward. Whatever your situation, it's a moment of rebuilding, of starting over. You need restoration. What do you do? Where do you turn? The people of Israel have been called out of Egypt and chosen as God's special inheritance from among the nations. They had a covenant with Him. They were to be His people, and He was going to be their God. The promises of God were fulfilled through Joshua in the conquest of the promised land. After the transitional period of the judges, the people of God enjoyed their greatest prosperity during the reigns of David and Solomon. But after Solomon's death, the kingdom was split into two. This was God's judgment for Solomon's failure to remain loyal to the Lord. The history of the divided kingdom is a downward spiral as the people failed to remain loyal to Yahweh. God had made it clear in the Torah that spiritual adultery would lead to judgment via exile. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, and repatriated the population. Then in 586 BC, the Babylonian Empire conquered the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin, and exiled most of the population to Babylon. Through the prophet Jeremiah, God had promised that the exile would last 70 years so that the land would enjoy a Sabbath rest. Despite His people's unfaithfulness, God remains faithful. Now, living under the Persian Empire, the people of God are given permission to return to the land, to rebuild the temple, and eventually the city of Jerusalem. Still, questions remain. Are we still the chosen people of God? Are the promises to Abraham and David still in effect? Is there truly hope for us? Is Yahweh still for us? The answer is yes, because God had plans for a future and a hope for His people, as He told them in Jeremiah 29:11. and because he loves them with an everlasting love, Jeremiah 31, 3 and 4. He's not done with them. Today, we're moving to volume 3 of our series After the Exile, a study of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. In this series, we're learning how God used people like Zerubbabel, Joshua, Haggai, Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Mordecai. They took action to help the people of God rebuild their lives and return to Him. The Lord also moved in the hearts of pagan kings to orchestrate good things for His people. God is sovereign and He is in control. His plans and purposes are never thwarted. In this series, we're learning that despite trials and tribulations, we can always return to God, and His promises for us will be fulfilled. Last time we concluded Volume 2, Nehemiah, Rebuilding the Covenant Community. Today, we will spend time reviewing the context for our Volume 3 in the series, Esther, Preserving the Covenant Community. Let's get started. Let's spend some time in the context, the timeline for these three books, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, as they happen after the exile. So this chart is, of course, viewable as you're watching the video, but it'll also be on the series page available to you on the website. So let's get started. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah in 586 BC. In 538, Cyrus of Persia decreed the return of the Jews to the land. The temple construction began in 535, and then it was stopped until 520, because in 521 Darius I became king of Persia, and then in 520 Haggai and Zechariah began their prophetic ministry, encouraging the people of God to finish the temple, which was completed in 515 BC. Ahasuerus became king of Persia in 486, and then Esther, the subject of Volume 3, became queen of Persia in 479 BC. Haman's decree to kill all Jews happened in 474, and that led to the Feast of Purim being established. In 464 BC, Artaxerxes I became king of Persia. It was 458 BC when our priest and scribe Ezra went to Jerusalem, and then in 444 through 443 is when Nehemiah went to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. So you can see that the story of Esther happens before the ministry of Ezra and Nehemiah, even though we covered those two series first. We went in through the chronological order according to our Bibles, but the events in the book of Esther happened before the time of Ezra and before the time of Nehemiah, before those books events are recorded. And I'm thankful to Dr. Charles Colbert Ryrie from his Ryrie Study Bible for this timeline. Let's now talk about the Persian Empire context. There are a number of Persian rulers that are mentioned in the books of Ezra, Esther, and Nehemiah, and that allows us to understand the times that God's people were living under. Of course, we already mentioned Cyrus. He was the Persian ruler from 559 through 530 BC. He was followed by Cambyses from 530 to 522 BC, and then Smerdis in 522, and finally Darius I, or Darius the Great, Darius I, from 521 to 486 BC. So if you look at the context, those four rulers, the context fits the chapters 1 through 6 of Ezra. There's no mention in Ezra of Cambyses or Smerdis, but both Darius I and Ahasuerus and Cyrus, they all get mentioned there. In relation to the other books of the Old Testament, the prophet Haggai from 520 BC, and then Zechariah 520 to 518 BC. Then we have Xerxes I, or Ahasuerus. This is the king of the book of Esther. He's mentioned in Ezra chapter 4, verse 6. And of course, his timeline as Esther is around 465 when he comes to the throne. Then you have Artaxerxes I from 464 to 424 BC, and he's referenced in Ezra in chapters 4, 7 to 23, and chapter 7 to 10. And also, his reign coincides with the ministry of the prophet Malachi. Then Darius II, from 423 to 404 BC, that coincides with the ministry of Nehemiah, which went from 445 through 425 BC. And again, this comes directly from the Ryrie Study Bible by Dr. Charles Caldwell Ryrie. In terms of a geographical setting, mainly I want to speak about the three different routes or routes that the different returns of the people of God took. Zerubbabel was the first one. It was the first return in 539 BC. King Cyrus decreed that all the Jews exiled to Babylon could return to their homeland, and a contingent of Jews returned under his leadership and the leadership of Jeshua, the high priest. Then, around 458 BC, is when the scribe Ezra led a smaller group of Jews to Judea, taking the shorter, more dangerous desert route that passed through Tadmor. And finally, it was 445 BC, while Nehemiah was in Susa, that King Artaxerxes gave him permission to travel to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls on the city. So, just like there were three exiles prior to the destruction of the temple in 586 BC, we have also three different returns under different leadership: Zerubbabel and Jeshua, Ezra, and then Nehemiah. So now, with that context for our entire series after the exile, let's now turn to the introduction of volume 3 of our series, and let's look at the book of Esther. We're calling our series on the book of Esther Preserving the Covenant Community. Our key verse for this series is this: For if you keep silent at this time, liberation and rescue will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Esther 4:14. God told his people that if they chose to break their covenant with him, he would again allow other nations to take them into slavery. One example of that is Jeremiah 2:14 and 15. True to his promises, God brought the Assyrians and the Babylonians to issue his chastisement upon wayward Israel and Judah. Because Judah persisted in her unfaithfulness to the covenant, God chastened his people with 70 years of captivity, from which they returned to Jerusalem, as reported by Ezra and Nehemiah. Cyrus overthrew Babylon in October 539, and in accord with his policy of encouraging subject people to return to their homelands, he issued a decree in 538 allowing the Jews to do the same. About 50,000 did return under the leadership of Zerubbabel, and the foundation of the temple was laid, though it was not completed until 515 in the reign of Darius. As there had been three waves of deportation from Israel into Babylon in 605 BC, 597, and 586, so there were actually three returns to Jerusalem over a 9-decade span. Complete, uncontested political autonomy, however, never returned. I'm thankful for Dr. John MacArthur in his MacArthur Bible Commentary and Dr. Ryrie from his Ryrie Study Bible for this scriptural and historical setting. Let's look now at the authorship and date of writing for the book of Esther, which is an anonymous composition. There is a reference in chapter 9, verse 20, that Mordecai recorded these things, and that implies that at least that part, if not all of the book, was written by him. The absence of God's name in the book of Esther may be due to the fact that the author intended the book to become part of the official Persian court record. The use of God's name might have prevented that from happening. The author of the book had considerable knowledge of Persian court life and customs. Thus, Mordecai might be identified with the Morduca, mentioned as a Persian court official in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Xerxes. Immediate impressions favor a date for the book of Esther shortly after 465 BC, if Ahasuerus is identified with Xerxes, who died that year. Many contemporary scholars, however, favor a later date. The apocryphal book of Ecclesiasticus, written about 180 BC, refers to that period. Jewish heroes are mentioned there, but Esther and Mordecai are not included. Some also suggest the period of the Maccabees as the time of the book's writing. The point is, we don't know for sure. This information comes from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, an entry by Walter Elwell and Barry J. Bitzel on the book of Esther. From the same resource, the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, let's take a look at our heroine of this book. Of course, God is always the hero, the main character, but he uses people. And in this case, he uses this lady named Esther. Who is she? One of the two names borne by the Jewish queen of Persia. Hadassah was her Hebrew name, which means myrtle. And we see that in Esther 2, verse 7. And then her Persian name, Esther, means star. That's her name as the Queen of Persia. So she is the Jewish Queen of Persia. Some scholars speculate a connection with the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, since exiled Jews were occasionally given pagan names. You see that, for example, in Daniel chapter 1. Esther was an orphan from the tribe of Benjamin who lived with the Jewish exiles in Persia. She was reared by her cousin Mordecai, who was a minor government official and cover leader of the Jewish community in Susa, the capital of the Persian kingdom. Esther became queen after King Ahasuerus or Xerxes became displeased with Queen Vashti when she refused to obey his command to attend a festival. After Esther's coronation, she discreetly won Xerxes' confidence by informing him of an assassination plot, chapter 2, verses 21 and 23. The favor she won in the king's eyes enabled her to deliver her family and her people from a massacre by Haman, a high official, to the king. Again, this is another entry from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, and we get a profile of one of the main characters in this book, Queen Esther. And now let's take a look at the content outline of the book of Esther. When we study a book of the Bible, it's always a good idea to kind of have a high level overview of what's in the book, right? And before we dive into the details of each chapter and verse, it's good to have a big picture approach to what's in the book. And for this, I'm thankful to Dr. J. Vernon McGee in his commentary on Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Here's how he breaks down the content. And of course, Dr. McGee is unique in the way he spoke, in the way he preached, very accessible to all of us who are looking to learn. So here's how he broke it down. First, the wife who refused to obey her husband, chapter 1. The beauty contest to choose a real queen, chapter 2. Haman and anti-Semitism, chapter 3. For such a time as this, chapter 4. The scepter of grace and the nobility of Esther, chapter 5. When a king could not sleep at night, chapter 6. The man who came to dinner but died on the gallows, chapter 7. The message of hope that went out from the king, chapter 8. The institution of the Feast of Purim, chapters 9 and 10. So again, Dr. McGee brilliantly tells you exactly what's happening in the book of Esther in just a few words. Just brilliant, thankful that his work has been preserved for all of us who want to learn more about the scriptures. Let's now hear from some of our trusted Bible teachers and pastors about what is the message of the book of Esther. First, Dr. David Jeremiah, in his quick, short book, very useful book, Understanding the 666 Books of the Bible, he says, quote, "Well, with the book of Esther, we have the only book of the Bible containing no reference to God's name. Yet his unchanging, unseen hand cannot be missed. Esther, the last of the historical books of the Old Testament, tells a dramatic story of a woman caught up in a battle for the survival of the Jewish people. The book of Esther shows how God's unseen hand orchestrated the affairs of humanity by providential arrangement. Esther teaches that God purposely guides our steps even when we're not aware of it and even when things don't make sense. End quote. Next, let's hear from our friends at the Bible Project. They say, quote, "This is one of the more exciting and curious books in the Bible. The story is set over 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites from their land. While some Jews did return to Jerusalem, many did not. The book of Esther is about a Jewish community living in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. The main characters are two Jews, Mordecai and his niece Esther. Then there is the king of Persia and the Persian official Haman, the cunning villain. The story is full of odd coincidences and ironic reversals that force you to see God's purpose at work behind every scene. When God's people are in exile, unable to obey the Torah perfectly, and when God seems absent, does this mean God is done with Israel? Has he abandoned his promises? The book of Esther says no. The story invites us to see that God can and does work in the mess and moral ambiguity of human history, using the faithfulness of even morally compromised people to accomplish his purposes." End quote. We already heard from Dr. J. Vernon McGee, but here is how he summarizes the message of the book of Esther. He says, quote, "The book of Esther, in one sense, is the most remarkable in the Bible, and that is because the name of God is not mentioned in this book at all. There is not even a divine title or pronoun that refers to God. The book of Esther is the romance of providence. God directs this material universe in which we live today by his providence. In fact, it is the way he directs all of his creation. These people, in a foreign land, out of the will of God, have not obeyed his orders because his orders were to return to the land of Israel. They remain, they disobeyed. In this we see God in a new way. Although they're not in his will, we see God directing them. How? By his providence." End quote. The theme of the providence of God is all throughout the book of Esther, and we will see that as we go into the detailed study of this great book. Now let's hear from Dr. Tony Evans in his Bible commentary. He says, quote, "Esther is unique because it is the only book in Scripture that does not mention the name of God directly. This is because God wanted to use the book to show how his providence, that is, his invisible hand, works behind the scenes to bring about his purposes in history. This book demonstrates that though his methods vary, God is in control. His kingdom promises and purposes cannot be thwarted." End quote. Now let's hear from Dr. John MacArthur from his Bible commentary. He says, quote, "Esther occurred during the Persian period of world history, which lasted from 539 BC to 331 BC. Ahasuerus ruled from 486 to 465. Esther covers the 483 to 473 BC portion of his reign. In Esther, all of God's unconditional covenant promises to Abraham and to David were jeopardized. However, God's love for Israel is nowhere more apparent than in this dramatic rescue of his people from pending elimination. There are no miracles in Esther, but the preservation of Israel through providential control of every event and person reveals the omniscience and omnipotence of Jehovah. Whether he is named is not the issue. He is clearly the main character in the drama." End quote. And that's true. It is all about God. His name is not mentioned. As Dr. McGee said, not even a pronoun or a divine title, but he is the main character in this drama. Finally, let's hear from Dr. Mervyn Brenneman in his Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther commentary on the message of Esther. He says, quote, although God is not referred to explicitly, the author presupposed divine providence. This is the ideological theme of the book. In Israel history, the prophet spoke of the constant care given its nation by God both in salvation and discipline. All things happen at God's hand. The story of Esther is to be read with this particular worldview of the Old Testament. End quote. There is that theme again. God's providence, God's sovereignty, God's control of all things. On the series page on the website for the series on the book of Esther, we will have all these references listed, links to more detailed information on the Bible Project, Dr. Evans' Bible Commentary, Dr. Jeremiah's book on understanding the 66 books of the Bible, the MacArthur Bible Commentary, Dr. McGee's commentary on Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And we have also used Dr. Kittner's commentary on Ezra, Nehemiah, and of course, Dr. Brenneman on Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So those references will be available on the series page for the book of Esther on the website. And that brings us to the end of this introduction to the book of Esther. Thank you for listening today. In our next episode, we will have our first lesson in the study of Esther, and we will focus on chapter 1. Until then, this is Jose Figueroa for an approved workman, where we are rightly dividing the word of truth. May God richly bless you.